So we'll start with taking the 3 refuges and 5 precepts. And so this begins with bowing 3 times. So you can all come into a kneeling position. And you'll all be bowing together. So when bowing as a group, you pay attention to the people around you and try to all bow at the same time. Okay? Start the request. So chant together with her, nice and loud.
Tatiyampi mayam bhante tisaranena saha panchasila niyajama.
Good. Now repeat after me. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang saranang gacchami. So repeat after me. Dhammang saranang gacchami. Sanghang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami. Tutiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami. Tutiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami. Tasana sampunnang. Panati pata veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Adinnadana veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Kame sumicchāchāra veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Musavada veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Sura meraya majjapama dattana veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Sura meraya majjapama veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Imani pancha sikkhapadani samadhiyami.
Imani pancha sikkhapadani samadhiyami.
Silena sugating yanti, silena bhoga sampada, silena nimbuting yanti, tasma silang visodaye.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Good. And end with 3 more bows. Okay, very good. So at this time I'll give a Dhamma talk, and then after that we'll do some meditation practice. So starting with, again, paying homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So, we just started with taking the 3 refuges and 5 precepts, which is one of the most common ceremonies that is done in the Theravada school of Buddhism. So commonly it's done at the start of pretty much any event, the start of any substantial program. It's normal to start with the 3 refuges and the 5 precepts. I actually find this a really interesting way to start programs, because usually before beginning I have some idea what I'm planning to talk about. But then we take the 3 refuges and 5 precepts, and I just want to talk about the 3 refuges and 5 precepts. Which is good, because actually this is the foundation of our entire practice. So this is not something to skip over or ignore or take lightly, but rather it's something to keep reflecting upon, to keep reflecting on the significance of the 3 refuges and 5 precepts. So this is the foundation of our Buddhist practice. So if one doesn't have a deep understanding of taking the 3 refuges, then one doesn't understand Buddhism. This is what defines Buddhist practice, is the 3 refuges. And if one is not committed to following the 5 precepts, then one is lacking the foundation of sila, which is the first of the 3 trainings. So the higher trainings of samadhi and panya, so meditative concentration and wisdom, rely upon the foundation of morality, of good moral habits, of wholesome habits, what we call sila. So the 3 refuges and 5 precepts are this critical starting point for our Buddhist practice. And even if you've been practicing Buddhism for your entire life, or 100,000 lifetimes, you keep coming back to the 3 refuges and 5 precepts. So the 3 refuges, this is really the beginning of Buddhist practice. And actually it's interesting if you read in the suttas, in many suttas which start with a debate between the Buddha and non-Buddhist people, if during the course of the debate the person becomes eventually convinced that the Buddha knows what he's talking about, then at the end of the sutta the person will take the 3 refuges. So that's the statement of saying, like, okay, I'm actually going to give this Buddhism thing a real try, a really sincere try. So the 3 refuges, the first one is taking refuge in the Buddha. So Buddhang saranang gacchami, so taking refuge in the Buddha. And so what this means is, well, first off, we need to understand what a Buddha is. And this is especially timely because this is the month of Vesak. So we had our official Vesak celebration here last week. Many monasteries are having their Vesak celebration today. And ultimately, it's not the exact day that we select which matters, but rather it's the recollection of the Buddha that matters. So we set aside a day or a month for recollecting the Buddha, but actually our entire life should be a recollection of the Buddha. Our entire life should be constantly bringing to mind who the Buddha was, what a Buddha is. And one of the really critical elements of recollecting a Buddha, by the way, is recognizing that every single one of us has the capacity to become a Buddha. Every single one of us has exactly the same innate abilities that the Buddha had before he attained awakening. So there's nothing that distinguishes us from what the Buddha was like before his awakening. Which means that if we practice, then we can become fully awakened, just as he did. So often we're really good at finding excuses for why we think we're not capable of being awakened. But those are all just excuses. They're just stories we tell ourselves. No, they're not true. The truth is that Buddhahood is a universal quality which is accessible to all sentient beings. It's something which is reachable by everyone. So a Buddha, the word Buddha literally means awake, one who is awake. By the way, that means the rest of us are asleep. So this is important to remember. We're all dreaming. We're all asleep. We're living in a dream world. So the only people who are awake are Buddhas. The rest of us are still asleep. So that's the first really critical point the Buddha is making. Just by the mere fact that he calls himself Buddha, he's pointing to the fact that the rest of us are not awake. The rest of us are still asleep, still dreaming, still living in a delusional world of our own imagination. So the first critical quality to understand about a Buddha is that a Buddha has woken up to the true nature of reality. So this is the quality of wisdom, of perfect understanding, a perfect understanding of the true nature of reality. And he did this through training his own mind. And this is because all of our experience of the world is experienced through our mind. So the mind is therefore that which is of prime importance. It's more important than anything else. So Buddhism is then ultimately all about training the mind. Because it's if the mind is clear, then it sees things clearly. If the mind is blurry or hazy or distorted, then our picture of reality is blurry and hazy and distorted. So training the mind then is the critical quality of our practice. So Buddha is one who has woken up to the true nature of reality, who sees things as they actually are. And that carries with it a few very important effects. So one of the effects of seeing reality as it is that one recognizes that oneself is not separate from any other being. That ultimately there is no separation between sentient beings. So compassion is a natural quality of an awakened being. Compassion is also a quality that one can develop in order to progress towards awakening. So it's both a factor of the path to awakening, and it's also a natural result of completing the path to awakening. So compassion is another one of the central qualities of a Buddha. So these are actually the two main qualities, the qualities of wisdom and compassion. So infinite wisdom and infinite compassion. These are the two qualities of an awakened being. And if we look at our own mind, we can actually see that we already have both of those qualities, just not fully developed. We have a little bit of wisdom and a little bit of compassion. And with practice, we can grow our wisdom and compassion. And if we keep growing our wisdom and compassion, then eventually we can reach Buddha levels of wisdom and compassion and become fully awakened, just as he did. Another quality of a Buddha is that, so Buddha and all awakened beings, so when I talk about Buddhas, it usually also includes arhats, for those who know what I'm talking about. We can include both of them under the same category. So a Buddha also has the quality of always being happy no matter what happens. So normally we think, well, I'm happy when I get the food I like, and I'm unhappy when I get food I don't like. I'm happy when my body feels good. I'm unhappy when my body feels sick or weak or tired. I'm happy when people are nice to me. I'm unhappy when people are mean to me. Like we have our excuses for when we're happy and when we're not happy. Well, a Buddha is happy all the time no matter what. Sounds pretty good. Does that sound appealing to anybody? Anybody want some of that? A few people? Okay. And the rest of you weren't paying attention, so that's also fine. Yeah, so that's another quality of a Buddha, is that they have unconditional happiness. They're always happy no matter what conditions they're experiencing. And with this also comes the quality of fearlessness. So Buddha has no fear. And the reason they have no fear is because of the previous reasons. So a clear understanding of the nature of reality and unconditional happiness. So they're always happy no matter what happens. And also they understand how reality works, so they can't be caught off guard by anything. Whatever happens, they're always ready to face it with dignity, with composure, with an appropriate response. So a Buddha has nothing to fear. It's a completely fearless being. So these are all qualities that we aspire towards in Buddhist practice. So taking refuge in the Buddha, we're recognizing the qualities of the Buddha as being the most admirable, praiseworthy qualities imaginable in a living being. We recognize those qualities as things which we aspire towards, that we hold up as role model. So we hold the Buddha up as a role model of the qualities that we wish to develop within ourselves. And again, this is really important. So Buddhist practice is not just about respecting the Buddha, it's about trying to become like the Buddha. It's about trying to become exactly the same as the Buddha. That's what we're doing here. It's what our practice is all about. So the Buddha, based upon his clear vision of reality, his clear understanding of the way things are, the Buddha spoke. One of the other qualities of a Buddha, by the way, is that they always tell the truth. They never say anything which isn't true. They only speak the truth. So from the moment the Buddha attained awakening until the moment he passed away, he only ever spoke the truth. In fact, there's a lovely sutta, don't remember where it is off the top of my head, somewhere in the Khuddaka Nikaya. There's a lovely sutta where the Buddha is talking about the meaning of one of the names that we use for a Buddha. So one of the things we call a Buddha is Tathagata. So this Pali word Tathagata is a word that means a Buddha. And the Buddha is giving a number of different definitions of the word Tathagata. And one of the definitions he gives is that everything that a Buddha says is always true. It's never wrong. So the first part of that name, Tatha, can mean true. It can mean a few different things, but one of its meanings is true. So Tathagata is the truth speaker, the one who only speaks truth. So the Buddha understood reality, so infinite wisdom. He recognized the suffering of living beings and wishes for them to be free of suffering, so infinite compassion. And based upon that infinite wisdom and infinite compassion, he taught. So from the moment he attained awakening until the moment he passed away, he was always teaching people, teaching them the path to happiness, the path to wisdom, the same practices that he discovered and followed in order to attain awakening. He taught to everyone who would listen. He was always sharing the Dhamma. He was always speaking words of truth for people to learn how to be happy and wise. So that's the Dhamma. So taking refuge in Dhamma means that we take the Buddha's word seriously. We make a sincere effort to learn what the Buddha taught, to try to understand what the Buddha taught, and to place tremendous value on the Buddha's teachings. And this also means a willingness to relinquish our own opinions. So this is very important. Often when people first get interested in Buddhism, they have all their pre-existing opinions about how they think things are and what they think is important. So then they come to Buddhism and they're like, well, I like these things that the Buddha said, but not those things. So I'm gonna throw away that stuff. I don't like it. I'm gonna replace it with my own opinions, which of course are infinitely superior. So even if we don't have the audacity to say that out loud, that's often how we think. We think that the best opinions in the whole world are mine. My opinions are always correct. They're always the best. Taking refuge in Dhamma means that we say that Buddha's opinions are always the best. The Buddha's opinions are the highest. The Buddha's opinions are the ones that we're trying to learn about and understand. And this doesn't necessarily mean you need to believe everything the Buddha said right away, but it means you need to give it a serious try. Give the Buddha the benefit of the doubt. Really try to understand what he taught and see for yourself whether or not it's true. There's a bhikkhuni from the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, Venerable Robina Courtine, and she says she set out to try to prove the Buddha wrong. And she said she's been trying for decades to prove the Buddha wrong, and she still hasn't succeeded. But in the course of doing so, what happened was the arising of faith. Because the more we investigate and apply the Buddha's teachings, the more clearly we see that, as he said, he only ever spoke the truth. He never said anything other than truth. So learning the Dhamma. This means, first off, reading the suttas. So the suttas are the closest thing that we have to direct quotations from a fully awakened being. That's pretty special. So if you haven't read through all of the suttas at least once in this life, do it. Start today. Who here has already read through all the suttas at least once? Only me? Okay, that's really disappointing. Who here is currently working on it? Currently reading suttas diligently, trying to get through all of them? Okay, about half of you. That's really wonderful. The rest of you, shame on you. You're going to start this evening. Basically, as soon as you go home, you're going to get out your sutta books, which you should have. If you don't, you can go to suttacentral.net. It's all online these days. And you're going to start reading through the suttas cover to cover. So it doesn't take very long. So if you read 20, 30 minutes a day, you'll get through all of it in 2 years. So very reasonable time commitment. In 2 years. How many of you have done something half an hour a day for at least 2 years? Watching TV, playing video games, chatting with your friends. Okay, so you all know that you're quite capable of doing a 30-minute a day commitment for 2 years. So how much benefit did you get from half an hour of TV a day for 2 years? How much benefit? 0? Possibly a negative number, in fact, maybe more harm than benefit. Yeah, not so good. So instead, think what would happen if now you were reflecting, oh, over the last 2 years, I read through all the suttas. Imagine how great that would feel. But more importantly, it gives you a very solid basis for understanding the Dhamma. So I'm not necessarily saying that everything in the suttas is 100% true. I'm not necessarily saying that. What I am saying is that if you read through all the suttas, then you will have a much clearer understanding of what the Dhamma is, a much clearer understanding of what the Buddha taught, a much clearer understanding of what the path to awakening is. And if you come across some things in the suttas that you don't understand, or that sound strange, or that you're not so sure about, then go to some monks and ask. Go to some bhikkhus and bhikkhunis who've been practicing for many years and ask questions. You can say like, oh, in this sutta, it's recorded that the Buddha said such and such. What does that mean? How do I understand this? So ask questions. The Buddha said that the causal condition for the arising of wisdom is to go to wise people and ask questions. So very practical. Do you want to be wise? Well, then go to wise people and ask them questions. Pretty simple. So taking refuge in Dhamma means that we make a sincere effort to read the suttas, to contemplate them, to discuss them, to ask questions about them, to listen to Dhamma talks. So you're all here today listening to a Dhamma talk. That's great. I don't pretend to be perfectly wise, but I do attempt to present the Dhamma. And that's what most Dhamma teachers are doing. They're trying their best to present their understanding of Dhamma. So listening to Dhamma talks from many different teachers, from many different sources, as well as reading through the suttas cover to cover, you start to get a more complete picture of what the Buddha taught and how to apply it to your life. And if we really are taking the Dhamma seriously, if we really do believe that the Dhamma is the most important body of knowledge in the world, then naturally we're going to try to follow its instructions. So it's kind of like if you have someone who says that they love pizza, and they have books and books about pizza, and they read books about pizza, and they watch YouTube talks about pizza. And you're like, yeah, but have you ever actually eaten any pizza? And they're like, well, actually, no, but I've got a great book about it, and I've read it a few times. It's like, well, okay. And they're like, I spent hundreds of hours on YouTube watching videos about pizza. It's like, well, okay. You still have no idea what pizza is. It's all just a bunch of abstract ideas. It's the same. Even if you're born in a Buddhist country, raised by a Buddhist family, you've been listening to Dhamma talks your entire life from the time you were born, and you've been reading Buddhist books your entire life from the time you were able to read, going to temples from the time you were born, you still might not understand the Dhamma. Because the Dhamma is something to be lived, it's something to be experienced. So this does mean if you have all the conditions I just spoke about, it means you're off to a really great start. And when you do start practicing the Dhamma, it will be much faster and easier for you. So those of us who come from non-Buddhist cultures and who started learning about Buddhism later in life, it's much more difficult. We have a much steeper initial learning curve. But either way, it comes to the same, which is that you need to actually put the teachings into practice in order to really understand what they're talking about. Just as you don't really understand pizza until you actually put it in your mouth and start chewing. In the same way, you don't really understand the Buddhist teachings until you start living them. And if we actually do take refuge in Dhamma, then that's what we're going to try to do. We're going to try to apply the Dhamma to our life. And taking refuge in Sangha. So the word Sangha, in the suttas, it almost always refers to the monastic community. So the community of bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, so male and female monks in the Buddhist order. Occasionally the Buddha uses the word Sangha in a broader sense to mean anyone who's attained some degree of awakening. Anyone who's attained at least one of the irreversible stages of enlightenment. For the record, such people are relatively rare. You don't come across them very often. But they do exist, and you might have the good fortune to meet one at some point in your life. They're not common. So normally when we talk about Sangha, we talk about the monastic community. So here, taking refuge in the Sangha, well, first off, it's acknowledging that the monastic form is something that was created by the Buddha as the ideal conditions for people to practice the path of awakening. And so the Buddha created, again, both bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, so the monastic form for people to commit themselves fully to practicing his instructions, to practicing the Dhamma. So even if one is not oneself a monk, even if one is not oneself even interested in becoming a monk, taking refuge in Sangha means that one acknowledges the value and importance of having the monastic order existing in the world. And the Buddha also spoke about the value and importance of going to visit Buddhist monks from time to time. Which, again, you're all here at the monastery today, so far so good. You've come to see some monks today. That's very good. The Buddha says even just seeing a bhikkhu or a bhikkhuni is already something that produces a lot of good karma. So even just going and looking at a monk is already something which starts to turn your mind towards awakening. In fact, the beginning of the Buddha's own spiritual practice was when he saw a monk. It wasn't a Buddhist monk, because at the time there weren't any Buddhists and there wasn't any Buddhism. So this is before the Buddha attained awakening. So he saw some kind of monk. We actually don't know which kind, because it's not recorded in the texts anywhere. But he saw some kind of spiritual seeker, some kind of monastic person. And that was when the Buddha realized that there was another way of living life, a way of living life which was focused upon spiritual self-development, rather than upon the ordinary pursuits of sensuality and acquisition that we tend to get caught up in. So, taking refuge in Sangha means acknowledging the value and importance of Buddhist monasticism. And actually, when the Sangha dies out, then Buddhism will die out shortly afterwards. It won't last long. So the first thing that disappears is the Sangha. Once the Sangha disappears, then before long the Dhamma disappears. And once the Dhamma disappears, then people forget about the Buddha. So this is inevitable. It always happens. So Buddhism reappears once every few million years or so, and it lasts for a while, maybe a few thousand years, and then it dies out. This is normal. This happens over and over and over again throughout the infinitely long cycle of reality. So right now, we're fortunate enough to be at a time when Buddhism is still around, but it won't last forever. It will die out sooner or later. And the first thing that goes is the Sangha. So it's important to really cherish and value the existence of the Sangha in our lives, and to see the Sangha as a source of inspiration, a source of spiritual support for our own practice, for our own development. Again, you don't necessarily need to join the Sangha in this life, but just having an appreciation for its existence is a very important part of Buddhist practice. And another reason for this, by the way, is because if one appreciates the Dhamma, then one recognizes that the essence of Dhamma is letting go. The essence of Dhamma is relinquishment, renunciation. And the essence of monastic life is renunciation, it's relinquishment. So these are inseparable. So if one has a deep appreciation for the Dhamma, then one naturally appreciates the monastic community. One naturally appreciates the monastic form. And if one does not appreciate the monastic form, then it means that one doesn't really understand the Dhamma yet. That one is still incomplete in one's understanding of the Buddha's teachings. So that's the 3 refuges. And then the 5 precepts. So we took the 5 precepts. And this is getting into an understanding of how to live the Dhamma. So again, the Buddha's teachings it's not just a bunch of abstract ideas that we read about and think about and then move on to do something else with our lives. But rather, the Dhamma is meant to be a practical guide for how we can live in a way that helps us progress towards Buddhahood. So the Dhamma is a practical guide for how to become happier, calmer, kinder, and wiser with every passing day. And the Buddha gives many different frameworks for understanding the Dhamma, but one of the most commonly used frameworks is the threefold training. So Sila, Samadhi, and Panya. Who's heard of this before? Okay. Actually, all of you have, because I mentioned it earlier in the same talk. So Sila we normally translate as morality or virtue. But technically the word Sila means habit. So taking on Sila means we're trying to develop good habits, wholesome habits. And the essence of Sila, the Buddha, in a number of suttas, the Buddha defines Sila as 2 basic principles. So the first principle is don't hurt anyone. Sounds pretty simple, yeah? Don't hurt anyone. Either yourself or other people, doesn't matter. Don't hurt anyone. And the second one is try to help people. Again, very simple. Don't hurt anyone, try to help everyone. Very simple principles. Everything else comes from these 2 basic principles. And you'll notice that both of these are principles of compassion. So compassion actually runs through all of Buddhist practice right from the very beginning. Actually, the very beginning of Buddhist practice is when we recognize our own suffering. We recognize our own sadness and depression and confusion and pain, and we want to be free of this sadness. We want to be happy. So we see our own suffering and we want to take that away. Well, that's actually compassion. You're recognizing that a being is suffering and you want that suffering to go away. So as our practice develops, then we start to recognize that other people are in the same condition that we are. Other people are also suffering, and we also want them to be free of suffering. So we do what we can to help. And sometimes this takes very simple forms. So, for example, at lunchtime today, a lot of people brought food to offer to the community, to share with each other. So this is an act of compassion. So it's wanting to offer something to other people, wanting to give a nourishing, pleasant experience to other people, wanting to help to at least alleviate the suffering of hunger. So very simple, but very potent, very real, very tangible. Especially as a Buddhist monk, since we rely entirely on what's given to us. Every day is actually a really joyful day, because every day we get to see the generosity of other people. We quite literally feed on generosity. So we have a deep appreciation for the practice of generosity. So generosity is one part of sila, of developing wholesome habits, good habits of mind. And actually generosity, again, is not something to sweep aside lightly, because generosity includes the practice of renunciation, of relinquishment, of letting go, which, as I already mentioned, is the core of the Buddha's teachings. It's all about letting go. Renunciation, letting go, generosity is also a way that we start to reduce our self-attachment, our self-centeredness, which is another way of talking about Buddhist practice. Another way of talking about Buddhist practice is that it's all about relinquishing our self-centeredness, getting rid of our self-centeredness. So in order to give something to somebody else, you have to let go of a little bit of your sense of self. So it helps to erode our self-centeredness a little bit. So then the 5 precepts that we have. So the first one, so not killing any sentient being. This is an expression of that first basic principle of not harming anyone. So any sentient being also includes insects. It includes all manner of animals and spirits, and of course it includes other human beings. But it's very important to keep in mind that taking on the precept of not killing any sentient being, that also means, for example, when your cat is sick and you go to the vet and the vet says, well, there's no point in trying to treat the cat, we might as well just put it to sleep. That's called killing. Don't do it. First precept, don't kill any sentient being. That includes your pets. It's actually mind-blowing that this even needs to be said out loud, but it does need to be said out loud. Because it's such a common thing when someone's pet starts to get old and sick that they just take it to the vet to be put to sleep. But imagine if it was your mom or your best friend. Your best friend gets sick, so you take her to the hospital to get put to sleep. No, horrible. Absolutely horrifying. So don't do it to your furry friends either. Give them a chance to live their lives. Similarly, when you find spiders or ants or cockroaches or bees or hornets or whatever in your home, try to find a way to gently move them outside without injuring them. So conjuring up that mind of kindness and compassion, putting yourself in their position. So imagining you're going about your life and this 100-foot tall giant shows up and first they try to squash you. Well, that's not very nice. But maybe they decide to move you, but they move you very roughly and they break your legs in the process. Well, that's not very nice either. So when you're moving ants and spiders and such out of your home, do so very gently so that you don't injure them or hurt them in any way. Especially pay attention to their legs. Their legs are very small. Very easy to hurt their legs. And as one takes on the practice of not harming any living being, then compassion starts to arise naturally in the mind. It becomes stronger and stronger in the mind. So the second precept is similarly an expression of not harming others. So it's the practice of not taking what doesn't belong to us. So not stealing things. So we respect the possessions of others. Recognizing that when we have something that we think is ours, then we want to keep it. And when somebody else takes it without permission, that's painful. It's hurtful. And actually can be quite harmful. So if you park your car and you get out and you go to the store and then you come back out of the store and someone stole your car, well, that's very inconvenient. Not very nice at all. So similarly, we make a commitment to not take anything that isn't rightfully ours, not to take anything which isn't given to us, which doesn't belong to us. So instead, with each of these, the Buddha encourages the opposite. So instead of harming living beings, instead try to help living beings. Instead of stealing things, practice generosity, practice giving gifts to others. So cultivating the wholesome mind, the wholesome activities, rather than unwholesome activities. Because our actions are inseparable from our mind. So every action of body arises from the mind. And every action of body that we take strengthens the underlying mental pattern. So every time we hurt somebody else, we're strengthening our habit of harming, which then ultimately just makes us more and more miserable, makes us less and less happy. But the more we help other people, the more that strengthens the habit of helping, the habit of compassion, the habit of kindness and gentleness, all of which leads to serenity, leads to happiness, to joyfulness. The third precept, this one's a little complicated. So in Pali, it's kamesu mechachara. So mechachara means misconduct or wrong behavior. Kamesu means in sensuality. And kamesu mechachara in the suttas, it's defined particularly in terms of breaking the boundaries of trust in one's sexual relationships. So if one is in a committed relationship, then you don't break the boundaries of that relationship. So you don't cheat on your partner, you don't, or partners if you have many, don't cheat on your partner or partners. If you know that somebody else is in a relationship, don't get involved with them. Wait until they've wrapped up their current relationship before you start anything with them. And consent. Also, the Buddha speaks about the importance of making sure that you actually have permission, the proper permission to start a sexual relationship with someone. So again, the Buddha's encouraging us to reflect. So if one is not on a celibate path, so Buddhist monks are celibate, which is by far the easiest way to follow this precept. You just don't have to think about these things at all. The answer is always no, thank you. So it's very clear and simple. If you decide to not be celibate, well, for one thing, you've chosen a very complicated and difficult path. But if you do, then once again, it comes down to this basic principle. Don't hurt anyone. So before doing anything, ask yourself, is this going to hurt anyone? So cheating on your partner, that's a really great way to hurt people. Getting somebody else to cheat on their partner, again, that's a great way to hurt people. So this is something which we do need to be very careful with if we're not celibate. It's important to note, though, that the Buddha never said anything about the gender of the people involved. He never said anything about the number of people involved. So that's just not a factor. So the Buddha also never said anything about procreation. So whether or not you want to have children or not, it doesn't fit under this precept. So it doesn't matter whether somebody likes to be with people of the opposite gender or the same gender or multiple genders, it doesn't matter. What matters is, once again, try not to hurt anyone. That's the important part of this precept. And so again, it's trying to use our relationships as an avenue for developing wholesome states of mind, for developing kindness, for developing compassion, for developing patience. If you're going to be in a long-term relationship with someone, you're going to need a lot of patience and forgiveness and endurance. And it also gives you a lot of opportunities to practice kindness and generosity. So take up that opportunity. So constantly seeing your partner as a opportunity for you to be kind to someone, for you to be friendly and generous and caring towards someone. And as you develop that skill with your partner, then you can also learn how to be kind and caring and generous and friendly towards everyone that you meet. Then the fourth precept is not telling lies, so not deliberately saying anything untrue. And this is one part of the practice of right speech. So in the Noble Eightfold Path, the Buddha gives a more complex description of right speech, which includes not telling lies, of course, but it also means not telling divisive speech, so that means gossip, so malicious gossip. It also means not speaking harshly, and it also means not speaking uselessly. So instead, the Buddha says that we should say things that are true, that are beneficial. We should speak them gently. We should say them at the right time, the right place, in the right way. And optimally, he said we should speak words which help people to become better people. So words of Dhamma, words which help people become more wholesome. So if we're just like rambling on and on about the latest Kim Kardashian scandal, well, what a phenomenal waste of a precious human life. I see some nodding. Yeah. So don't waste your time and don't waste their time. But instead, ask yourself, how can I use speech in a way that helps me to be a better person and which helps the people around me to become better people as well? And the fifth precept, Sura Meriya Majjapamadhatthana, means not using alcohol or any intoxicant that causes negligence or that causes recklessness or heedlessness. So this also is a very important part of our practice. Again, the basic principle of all morality in Buddhism is don't hurt anyone. Well, when you consume intoxicants, you're damaging your own mindfulness, you're damaging your own wisdom, you're damaging your own self-restraint. So all of that is damaging someone. It's damaging yourself. And in fact, it's damaging the most precious things you have. Far more precious than your physical health, which you might also be damaging, by the way. But far more dangerous is to damage your spiritual health, to damage your mindfulness, your wisdom, your self-restraint. This is very, very dangerous. So the Buddha's recommendation then is not to consume alcohol at all. So no, not even one glass of wine with dinner. So that's definitely out of the question. Shoot for 0 glasses of wine ever. That's the right amount. I don't care how many antioxidants it has. You can get your antioxidants from other places. There's actually lots and lots of sources of antioxidants in the world. You don't need to have your medicine mixed with poison. And also extending that principle to any other intoxicating substance. So this also includes some prescription medications. You might be prescribed something, but then you start taking it and you realize that it's actually really weakening your mindfulness and it's making your mind blurry and unclear. Well, then you should talk to your doctor and see if there's another option, something else that maybe won't have that kind of harmful effect on your mind. And if you really do need to take a medicine like that for the sake of your health, then use the smallest amount possible and see when you can stop using it. But definitely don't take anything unnecessary that has any kind of blurring or weakening effect on your mindfulness, your wisdom, your self-restraint. These are our most cherished possessions. So that's the 5 precepts, and that covers the first of the 3 trainings, which is sila. And the second training is samadhi. So this is when we start to get into what we normally think of as meditation practice, which we will do some meditation in a few minutes, so be patient. So samadhi, the word literally means collecting together, or holding together, or unifying. So samadhi practice is when we're collecting together and unifying the mind. So normally our mind is all over the place. It's scattered and distracted and always bouncing from this thing to that thing. Or it's very hazy and blurry and kind of drifting. So with samadhi practice, we're bringing our mind together, holding it steady. And in the suttas, the Buddha also distinguishes between two kinds of samadhi. So samma samadhi, which means correct samadhi or right samadhi, and miccha samadhi, which means wrong samadhi. And the distinction here is the presence of mindfulness. So in order for samadhi to count as samma samadhi, correct samadhi, then the mind has to be extremely alert and attentive. Whereas miccha samadhi is when your mind is very stable and steady, but your attention is very weak. So, for example, your mind might be very peaceful and very still, but you're half asleep. Well, that's not very useful. It's not very beneficial. In fact, often when you're falling asleep at night, you can kind of slip into this kind of dull state where your mind isn't really doing anything at all. And it's very peaceful. But the mind feels very heavy and vague, kind of like a dense fog is filling your mind. That's not samadhi. That's what the Buddha would call miccha samadhi, wrong concentration. It's not useful. Rather, the Buddha encourages samma samadhi, right concentration, which is where the mind is very still, but also very sharp, very clear, very alert. And this is something which you can develop it to a little bit as you go throughout your day. For example, by constantly focusing on the sensation of your body. Then that can help to keep your mind from wandering around too much. But samadhi is something that we especially develop through formal meditation practice. So taking time to sit down and not do anything else except just focus on our meditation. Again, I especially recommend mindfulness of the body as a very powerful way of stabilizing the mind, focusing on the sensation of your body. And as the mind becomes increasingly steady and stable, the Buddha says, samahitang chittang yathabhutang jnanadassana, which means when the mind is in samadhi, when the mind is concentrated, then it knows and sees things as they really are. So yathabhuta means as it is, jnana means knowing, and dassana means seeing. So yathabhuta jnana dassana means knowing and seeing things as they are, knowing and seeing things accurately. So this is the development of wisdom. So when the mind is very steady, very sharp, very clear, then we can start to see things as they are. And the Buddha particularly encourages that we pay attention to three aspects of our experience. First off is recognizing that every single part of our experience has the aspect of impermanence, which in Pali is called anicca, which means that it's always constantly changing. Things are always appearing and vanishing. They're never the same for any length of time. So this is something to confirm through your own experience. When your mind is very steady and alert, pay attention to your body. What is our body? It's a constantly changing constellation of sensations. There's actually nothing in here that stays the same for even a moment. It's just a bunch of sensations that keep popping in and out of existence. Sensations that keep flashing through the mind. There's nothing stable here at all. It's like a mirage, like an illusion. And you look at the mind, and it's actually the same. Our mind is also constantly changing. It's a bunch of mental sensations, emotions and thoughts and memories, just coming and going, shifting and changing constantly. So recognizing the impermanence of body and mind, then one stops grasping at anything. So this is a really important part of our practice. When we recognize the impermanence of things, then we stop trying to hold on to them. Because you recognize that nothing can be held on to anyway. It's utterly pointless to even try. And in fact, it's because we keep trying to hold on to that which cannot be held on to. This is why we suffer. And we keep trying to grab something that can't be grabbed. We keep trying to hold on to experiences even as they're fading away. So this then leads to the second thing the Buddha encouraged us to contemplate, which is that all experiences are ultimately unsatisfying. And that might seem a little bit depressing, but actually when you contemplate this, then you realize that happiness is independent of sensations and experiences. So the contemplation of dukkha, of the unsatisfying nature of things, it's initially maybe a little disappointing. But what it's pointing at is that there is a higher happiness which is not tied to any specific detail of our experience. That there can be a joyfulness of mind which is not limited to any particular experience. And ultimately, this leads to the highest pinnacle of Buddhist wisdom, which is the realization that all things are ultimately impersonal. So this body is not me. This body is not mine. These thoughts are not me, not mine. These emotions are not me, not mine. Nothing whatsoever is personal. It's all just aspects of nature. So it's exactly the same as everything else in nature. So the seeds fall and grow in the spring and blossom in the summer and wither in the autumn and dormant during the winter. That's just normal. It's just nature. That's the same with our mind. Sensations appear in the body, shift and change, and then fade away. It's just normal. It's just part of nature. Emotions appear in the mind, shift and change, fade away. It's just part of nature. It's not me. It's not mine. We don't need to take any of it personally. So when we take things personally, then they're painful. When we don't take things personally, then they're not painful. So this is the path to true happiness. It's the path to awakening. It's the path to becoming exactly the same as the Buddha. And one of the great blessings of this practice is that you don't need to wait 100 years or 100 lifetimes or 100 eons to get results. You can actually notice the moment you start. So you're sitting there thinking like, I really want this talk to end. I hate this so much. I want to go home and watch TV. Well, okay, fair enough. But look at that desire. Look how unpleasant that desire is. And try to let go of that desire. Just coming back to contentment with just being right here in this body in this moment. And you'll notice that the painfulness of that desire starts to fade away. When you stop feeding the desire, then the corresponding pain starts to melt away from the mind. So you can get immediately tangible results. And of course, the more you practice, the stronger your results. My teacher's teacher, Ajahn Chah, he said, if you let go a little bit, then you get a little bit of peace. If you let go a lot, you get a lot of peace. And if you let go completely, then you get complete peace. And this is essentially what Buddhist practice is all about. Letting go of our desires, letting go of our self-identities, letting go of anything we're trying to hold on to, anything we're clinging to. Because all we're clinging to is our own pain. And the more we cling to our own pain, the stronger it is. And we're not letting go of anything valuable. All we're letting go of is pain. So in the Kachanagota Sutta, which we chant here every morning, the Buddha says, it's only suffering that arises and only suffering that ceases. In other words, any experience that appears, if we grab at it, that's just causing ourselves pain, because all we're doing is grabbing at suffering. And when things are fading away, when things are changing, we don't need to be bothered or disturbed, because all that's happening is suffering fading away, suffering disappearing. We're not losing anything valuable, we're just losing our pain. So this then is how we start to discover the unconditional happiness that the Buddha is talking about. And you can see this in every moment. And as you start to get a taste for it, for the sublime happiness of unconditional joy, then naturally you want to practice the Dhamma more. Naturally you want to commit more fully to following the Buddha's instructions. And the more you commit, the better the results you get. So those are a few words about Buddhism. So at this time we can do some meditation practice. So we'll do some sitting meditation, some walking meditation, some more sitting meditation. And then we'll end with a Q&A, so discussion at the end.